It's about this notion of being established in the awareness of the presence. For many years I was on the progressive path, and when the direct path came in, it was like a relief. But then after a while, visiting, various teachers, it seemed, I got the idea, or it seemed to be this thing that it's something that you either have or you don't have. Like, you're either enlightened or you're not enlightened, kind of thing. It's not a progressive process. But then when I read in one of your books about the colonizing, that was like a relief to me, because it felt more gentle and more attainable, something that could actually be achieved, rather than this thing of like, no, you're not enlightened. You may have had an awakening, you may have had a taster, but you're not enlightened. It's not like that, and kind of cast out from ever reaching the goal. So that felt good when I read about the colonizing. That kind of made sense to me, that okay, maybe gradually over time, as you sit in the, as we were this morning, it will kind of colonize more and more of the separate self until it's just totally dissolved. But what's been happening in the last year or two is a kind of apathy, because I almost feel like it's collapsed back into the progressive path. Like there's this little voice in me that's I have a, like when you were doing the guided meditations, it's effortless and wonderful to be in the presence with someone where it's so easy to drop back into. But then afterwards, my little voice says, you're not established. You're not yet established. So now I feel like this goal of being established in it has kind of replaced what I was doing for years on the progressive path.
Okay. I would recommend that you erase the terms enlightenment and establishment from your repertoire. Just abandon the words and the idea of them. Just as you've probably noticed, I very rarely use the term enlightenment or awakening unless somebody uses the term first in a question. Because there is so much misunderstanding about this. Enlightenment is not some extraordinary achievement. Enlightenment or awakening is simply the recognition of the nature of our own being. That's it, as simple as that. Not some special being, not a being that has been improved upon through many years of spiritual practice or discipline or meditation. Just the being that each of us now is. Not how our being might become, but how our being is now, literally now, with whatever we are experiencing, whatever turmoil of thoughts or feelings may be coursing through our minds or our bodies now, the being that lies at the heart of ourself, irrespective of the content of our experience, the simple being that each of us refers to when we say, I am, before what I am is colored or qualified by experience. Just the recognition of that being is what is referred to as enlightenment. So there is no such thing as an enlightened self or an enlightened being. That our being is already in the only condition it can be in, just pure, self-aware, uncolored, unlimited, ever-present being. If Hitler was sitting here and Ramana Maharshi was sitting here, if we asked them both, tell us about your thoughts and your feelings, they would be very different. If we ask them, describe the activities and the relationships which you have engaged in during their life, in your life, they would be very different. But if we said to them both, okay, turn away now from your thoughts, your feelings, your sensations, your activities and your perceptions, turn towards the feeling, the simple feeling of being, the feeling or the experience to which you refer when you say simply I am, before what I am is qualified by experience. As long as they both understood it, and as long as they could both go all the way back to the experience to which they refer when they say I am, they would describe exactly the same experience.
All of that is clear to me, but it's the thing of not having it dimmed again and again. I get so battered by the separate self-suffering that I kind of...
Well, in some people, and in some cases, this recognition of the nature of our being happens immediately, without any preparation. It happens once, and that recognition never leaves. And there are very few such examples in the literature. Ramana Maharshi happens to be one of them. I'm sure many of you know the story. I'll tell it briefly. He was a 16-year-old boy, I think it was 16. He became spontaneously, for no particular reason, overcome one day by the fear of death. And he literally thought, I'm going to die. He was just a regular kid. He was at school. He was playing with his friends. He came back from school one day. He thought, I'm going to die. He felt he was dying. And so he lay down on his bed and he thought, I'm dying now. And he asked himself the question, I'm paraphrasing now, what's going to happen to me? As I go through the death process, everything is going to be taken away from me. My parents, my brother, my schoolmates, my home, my thoughts, my feelings, my environment, and then my body. Everything is going to be taken away from me. And he just asked himself, but what is going to be left of me when everything that can be taken away from me has been taken away from me? In other words, he spontaneously entered into the process that he later formalized as self-inquiry. What is the essential nature of myself? What is that element of myself that cannot be removed from me? Or who am I when everything that can be removed from me has been removed from me? What remains of myself? Only that qualifies as I. So he entered this spontaneous investigation into the nature of his being, and such was the intensity of his interest and the clarity and purity of the way he looked, that he recognized there and then his essential, irreducible being. And it was never, the story relates, it was never, that knowledge, that recognition was never clouded or veiled again by experience. Now, that is unusual. In most cases, we go through this process, occasionally spontaneously. For instance, I'll give you another example of when this might happen spontaneously. Tremendous grief or tremendous fear. Because in tremendous grief, the mind simply abdicates. It just gives up. The grief is so great that it overwhelms the mind. The mind cannot fight it any longer. So grief often precipitates this total surrender, or tremendous sorrow, tremendous suffering sometimes can initiate this complete surrender. Tremendous fear also. This is why, for instance, people engage in extreme sports, because they artificially induce the fear of death in their experience. Then this brings the mind to an end. The mind it just cannot cope with this fear of death. And as the mind comes to an end, it plunges into its source. So these are other examples where there are There can be spontaneous glimpses of our true nature. They are glimpses because in almost all these cases, the old habits of thinking and feeling come back again and cloud the knowing of our own being. Well, a mind that has touched its own essence in this way is never the same again. It is always haunted by the memory of this peace. And so such a mind will then go to find books or friends or teachers or traditions or people or something that will give them a way to come back, to go back to that place that they found spontaneously. So that's how it happens for some people. Other people have this great longing, this is, I think, the case for most people, have this great longing for peace and happiness in their life. They spend the first 10 or so years of their life trying to fulfill this longing in the normal ways, objects, activities, substances, states of mind, and relationships. And when they have been failed sufficiently often by the conventional means of securing peace and happiness, they then begin to look beyond these means, and they meet someone that tells them about a particular teaching or recommends a book by Ramana Maharshi, and then they consciously begin to take this journey back. They begin to, they notice, yes, of course, I can't be my thoughts because my thoughts are always coming and going. But I'm not always coming and going. I am aware of my thoughts, but I'm not myself a thought. So they begin to walk their way back in this way, consciously, as a practice. And many people do this, and as a result of this, get a glimpse of their true nature. And then the old habits of thinking and feeling close in again and obscure it. And so we have to walk ourselves back again and again. And each time we go back, the pathway becomes a little easier and a little shorter. And the capacity of our objective experience to cloud the knowing of our own being diminishes correspondingly. So we begin to feel that we don't just visit our being from time to time. We begin to spend time there. Instead of just going for dinner, we spend the weekend there. And then after a while, we feel we move in. And for many people, it is a gradual, our objective experience becomes, it loses its power to veil our own being. So our own being and its innate peace begin to shine more and more in our life. We may never have the feeling, I am enlightened. I have to confess, I have never had the thought or the feeling, I am enlightened. I'm sorry if that's a disappointment to some of you.
I'm not so bothered about that either. I just want to be happy too.
Yes, so
but
don't think
just
about
this idea of, is it a process? Like the progressive path
the
was
process
such a...
is just...
So it's still a process. It's still a like, we have to keep practicing and then we'll get there. That's the bit that I'm wondering, it's the direct path, but there's still a process to it.
You know, the direct path from here to London is straight down the A40. You don't take the M5 and then the M6 and then the M1 and then that's the indirect path to London. So the direct path just means the quickest and shortest route. It goes in a straight line, but it doesn't necessarily mean you get there instantly.
I get it. Thank you, yeah, that makes sense.
So just feel that you are already this, not an enlightened self, but the light of the self. The light of your being is already everything it could ever be. It is in the same condition now as Ramana Maharshi's being was, or the Buddha's being was. It is in the same condition, only for, in most of us, our being is still colored or clouded by experience. So just in time, the capacity of our experience to obscure our being diminishes. And as a result, our being and its peace begin to shine through our experience. And you notice, hopefully, that by coming to these retreats, not just because of the guided meditations and the conversations, but the whole experience of being here, both in our meetings and outside our meetings, that something takes place on these retreats that magnifies our being in our experience and diminishes the capacity of our objective experience to obscure our being. In other words, our experience becomes more and more transparent to the light of our being.